They laughed when Earth delivered the final warning. And 12 minutes later, the first Imperial fleet vanished between two ordinary stars. Not slowed, not scattered. Vanished. 43 warships, 2 carriers, 6 troop barges. Every transponder cut from the map so completely that the Galactic Council's tactical sphere looked as if someone had reached into the projection and erased them by hand. The chamber had still been echoing with mockery when the silence hit. Even then, most of them did not understand what they were hearing. Not fear. Not yet. Just the first crack in the floor beneath a civilization that had mistaken restraint for weakness. The warning had come after Hestia Gate. For 3 days, the Terran colony burned in live transmission, while the Dravari Empire insisted it was conducting a lawful counterinsurgency. Council investigators were delayed by procedure. Motions were filed. Objections were raised. Trade delegations whispered about mineral routes and strategic balance. Meanwhile, a station with 80,000 human civilians lost atmosphere 1 sector at a time. When the hospital ship St. Geneva entered the kill zone under protected medical code, broadcasting wounded manifests and council clearance in 17 languages, the Dravari cruiser Vengeance of Tharos locked weapons anyway. It fired once through the reactor spine, then turned its batteries on the escape pods. The footage spread across half the spiral before the bodies were cold. That was when Ambassador Elena Ward stood in the center well of the council and read the Terran notice into the record. Her voice never rose. That was what some of them remembered later. Not anger, not grief. Just control so absolute it felt colder than rage. By authority of the United Earth Assembly, by the Mutual Defense Charter of the Terran Union, by precedent under Articles 12, 19, and 31 of Interstellar War Law, humanity declared the Dravari Empire in material breach of protected conduct. All Imperial war assets were ordered to withdraw from Hestia Corridor, release surviving captives, surrender the officers responsible for the destruction of the St. Geneva, and accept tribunal review within 1 standard day. If the Empire refused, any armed vessel operating inside the listed volumes would be considered beyond legal protection and subject to terminal interdiction. This was, she said, humanity's final warning. A final warning from the youngest major power in the chamber. The laughter started in the upper tiers, among the old houses whose star maps had once ended at Sol, because the species there had still been using chemical rockets. It spread fast. Dravari envoys bared their teeth. A council minister from the Velith Combine called it theater. Another asked whether Earth intended to throw asteroids by hand. The Imperial delegate, Lord Zarov, didn't even bother to stand. He only leaned back in his carved obsidian seat and said, with the lazy contempt of an empire too used to being feared, that humanity was welcome to submit its protests to the registry after its colony had finished learning obedience. Then the tactical officer on the council floor went pale violet and announced that the 8th Dravari Expeditionary Fleet had failed all relay checks. The room changed, but slowly, like a beast realizing the spear in its side might not be shallow. At first, they assumed equipment failure, then sabotage, then some unknown stellar anomaly. The Dravari command dismissed the loss as a navigational incident and sent a second force to reinforce the corridor. It vanished 4 hours later at the edge of the Phocis Drift. This time, there were fragments of audio, ragged and broken, recovered from the lane beacon before that too went dark. No battle noise, no weapons exchange. Only a burst of static, an officer shouting that they had contact where no ships should have been. And one final line, so badly distorted the translators argued over it for days. Something is inside the... Then nothing. Still, the Empire refused to bend. Pride is expensive. For empires, it is usually paid in other people's blood first. The Dravari throne broadcast a declaration of punitive action against Earth and its holdings, framing the disappearances as terrorist attacks by a cornered species. Its admirals assembled 3 battle groups, then 5, drawing support from client states that smelled profit in Terran defeat. The council speaker urged calm, procedure, and a fact-finding commission. The fact-finding commission never reached Hestia Gate. Its escort crossed into the disputed volume, found wreckage from the St. Geneva still orbiting like frozen testimony, and then watched an Imperial strike flotilla disappear one ship at a time from open space. Not explode, disappear. A destroyer would register on the grid, hard turn toward nothing, flash with a ring of white distortion along its hull, and then simply cease to occupy the universe in any measurable way. No debris bloom, no reactor flare, no escape pod telemetry, just absence. The observing commission transmitted 6 seconds of the event before its own captain ordered full retreat without waiting for council authorization. By the end of the 2nd day, 11 Imperial formations were missing. On the 3rd day, the markets broke. Insurance houses suspended military cargo underwriting in any lane touching Terran space. Merchant guilds pulled civilian traffic from half a dozen sectors because too many routes depended on human port services, human relay mathematics, human long-haul navigation software. Convoys backed up at choke points. Fuel futures spiked. The old powers, who had spent a century smirking at humanity's obsession with logistics and standards and redundant infrastructure, discovered with rising disbelief that the galaxy moved through channels humans had quietly learned better than anyone else. That should have been warning enough. But arrogance has momentum. The first real clue came from a crippled Dravari frigate that staggered out of translane near the neutral world of Olim, its bow peeled open and half its crew dead from decompression. It had not escaped a battle. It had escaped a place no one knew how to name. Survivors described a shadow in the lane itself, not a ship, but a geometry, a pressure in the folded physics of transit. Their formation had entered jump in clean order. Then every guidance system started reading impossible mass signatures where the charts said there was vacuum. The corridor bent. Distances changed. Vessels ahead vanished into black shears that opened without radiation spike or detectable drive output. Something moved beside them in the transit medium, pacing the fleet. Human voices came across every channel, calm and clear, repeating coordinates, legal citations, and withdrawal instructions. When the Admiral ordered acceleration, the shadow accelerated too. The next destroyer disappeared, then the carrier. Then the stars went wrong. By the time the frigate limped free, its crew had stopped asking what was hunting them and started asking how humanity had hidden it for so long. Earth answered that question in the most human way possible. Not with a boast, with a document release. At 0300 Standard, every registered government, military archive, news lattice, and embassy channel in council space received the same packet. Inside were 200 years of Terran strategic doctrine, declassified in part and redacted in all the places that mattered most. The title was simple enough to chill the blood of anyone reading it. Doctrine of Negative Space. Humanity, the packet explained, had emerged into the galactic community after surviving its own history of total war, extinction pressure, nuclear standoffs, siege, blockade, piracy, and resource collapse. Early Terran strategists had reached a conclusion the older species considered primitive. Space was too large to dominate by glory, too unforgiving to trust to deterrence by reputation alone. Therefore, if humanity were ever driven into a war for survival against superior numbers, it would not compete for spectacle. It would compete for access, movement, timing, supply, coordinates. It would weaponize the empty distances everybody else treated as neutral background. Humans had spent a century pretending this was commerce. Their freight companies seeded the lanes with maintenance infrastructure. Their ice haulers charted rogue masses no one cared about. Their relay tenders updated navigation meshes used by half the known spiral because Terran software was cheap, accurate, and boringly reliable. Their deep space rescue platforms, mocked as over-engineered, were also gravimetric observatories. Their civilian tug fleets drilled constantly in precision mass placement. Their military budget looked modest because the ships everyone counted were only the visible part of the organism. The real Terran fleet had never been parked in orbit for diplomats to admire. It had been built into the roads. Panic finally entered the council like smoke through cracks. Some delegates demanded immediate sanctions on Earth for deploying illegal transit weapons. Others demanded surrender terms before the humans turned the trade lattice into a graveyard. The legal scholars fought over whether Article 31 actually covered terminal interdiction of non-compliant belligerents inside protected volumes after atrocity-level breach. The answer came from humanity before the argument was finished. Ambassador Ward returned to the chamber carrying a case file from Hestia Gate and the blackened recognition band of a child recovered from the St. Geneva's escape pods. She laid both on the speaking table and asked whether interstellar law existed to restrain the strong or entertain them. No one laughed this time. Lord Zarov tried anyway. He said the humans were bluffing with hidden mines and surgical ambushes, that the Empire's main force had not yet committed, that terror effects were inflating isolated losses into myth. Then the Terran representative played a recording from the vengeance of Tharos. The cruiser's captain had been offered surrender after the hospital ship murders. Offered again after the First Fleet vanished. Offered a third time directly by Terran Fleet Command while his ship escorted refugee transports taken from Hestia orbit as human shields. He refused all three. The final transmission was from Admiral Hana Sato of the Terran Defense Fleet. Her face was expressionless. Behind her, on the bridge displays, stars moved in total silence. Captain Relic of the Vengeance of Tharos, you have exhausted all remedies. Release the civilians or be removed. The captain answered with laughter and ordered his gunners to open the refugee holds to vacuum if any human ship approached. Admiral Sato only nodded once, as if confirming a line item. The next camera angle came from the Vengeance itself. One moment, the cruiser held station with its weapons hot. The next, every escort around it vanished in perfect sequence. Outer screen first, then inner guard, then the engines of the flagship itself, disappearing as if cut away by invisible machinery. The cruiser did not explode. It just lost pieces of its existence. The captain screamed for reactor output, for target locks, for visual confirmation of the enemy. Then the bridge lights shifted red, and a human boarding team came through a hull that scans still insisted was intact. Not Marines in monstrous armor, not berserkers. Professional soldiers in matte black combat suits moving with the awful calm of people who had planned this for years. They secured the hostages. They arrested the command crew. They transmitted medical triage requests. Then they handed the surviving civilians blankets and water. That was the moment the wider galaxy began to understand the shape of the danger. Humanity was not enraged chaos. It was disciplined vengeance under law. The Empire made the worst possible choice. Emperor Varkesh, furious at the cracks forming in his own prestige, ordered the Grand Spear assembled. It was the largest concentration of Dravari power in 3 generations. Nearly 4,000 warships with siege carriers, planetary assault barges, mobile foundries, and enough kinetic mass to glass continents. He would take it to Sol himself, he said, and drag Earth's submission out before the Council in chains. His speech was broadcast across 300 worlds. He called humans mechanics with delusions of sovereignty. He promised to nail the skull of their admiral above the gate at Hestia. The Council begged for delay. Neutral powers pulled their diplomats from imperial territory. Insurance markets collapsed entirely. Old allies quietly shut their borders in case the war spilled outward. Through all of it, Earth remained eerily still. Civilian traffic withdrew behind defense zones. Lunar shipyards went dark. Mars stopped answering commercial inquiries. Terran embassies sent one notice each to their host governments. Remain outside designated volumes. Do not interfere with evacuation corridors. And do not mistake silence for indecision. Then the Grand Spear entered the outer lanes. What happened next was studied for centuries under 100 different names, but among human strategists, it stayed simple. The execution of the corridor. The lead elements of the Imperial Armada crossed into the Sol approach, expecting a defensive stand near the gas giant bastions or the mine screens around Luna. There was nothing. No heroic battle line, no desperate swarm, no transmission demanding surrender. Only empty space and the cold blue bead of a homeworld far ahead. The first 500 ships advanced in perfect formation for 11 minutes. On the 12th, their navigators began reporting drift against fixed stars. On the 13th, entire task groups found their relative positions changing without thrust. On the 14th, the rear of the formation disappeared from every command plot. The Grand Spear had entered a lattice of engineered gravity so vast and precise that space itself no longer agreed on where the fleet was. Humanity had hidden mass in the dark for 100 years. Rock, ice, alloy, dead stations, shielded engines, cold machines parked inside rogue debris fields and comet wakes, all networked by quantum timing and guided by observatories nobody thought were military assets. When activated together, they did not create a single superweapon. They created a battlefield where only Terran mathematics remained true. Imperial ships trying to translate found the lanes knotted shut. Ships holding formation drifted into pockets of distorted vacuum and vanished mid-broadcast. Point defense lit up against targets sensors could not classify, because the attackers were not inside normal space long enough to paint. Small Terran strike craft slipped through the gravity mesh like needles through cloth, tagging command nodes, killing relays, blinding flagships. Somewhere beyond visual range, colossal human platforms the size of shipyards altered the map by fractions of a percent, and those fractions killed empires. Varkesh demanded targets. There were none. He demanded retaliation. Against what? Human voices filled the channels again, not triumphant, not taunting, just formal. Grand Spear, you are operating after final warning and declared exclusionary volume. Power down and prepare for inspection. The Emperor answered with every weapon he had. Siege lances fired into coordinates already obsolete. Kinetic spreads vanished into warped vectors and returned to slaughter his own trailing columns. Assault wings launched and never emerged from the distortion. The flagship Iron Dominion pushed for full acceleration toward Earth. And that was when the Terran fleet finally appeared. Not in front of him, around him. Thousands of black holes rising out of the dark behind moons, inside shadow cones, out of station shells long believed civilian, from beneath the thermal noise of maintenance arrays and orbital scrapyards. Some were warships. Some had once been freighters. Some looked like moving architecture. All of them carried the same unadorned insignia on their flanks: Earth within a ring of stars. They formed no dramatic wall. They simply occupied every exit the Emperor had left himself. Then Admiral Sato came on screen. She sat beneath no banner. Her bridge was spare, functional, almost plain. That somehow made it worse. The galaxy had expected the theatrical heart of a cornered species, but the woman looking into the camera had the expression of an engineer shutting down a dangerous machine. "Emperor Varkesh," she said, "you crossed a protected line after murder under medical code, enslavement of civilians, and refusal of tribunal remedy. Your fleets have been rendered non-operational. Your command authority is terminated. Order surrender." He called her prey. He called humanity vermin. He called for ramming speed. Sato listened until he was finished. Then she gave a signal so small, most viewers missed it. Across the Grand Spear, every ship above a certain weapons threshold vanished within 8 seconds. There was no thunder, no firestorm, no glorious exchange, only the terrible efficiency of subtraction at impossible scale. Carriers, battleships, missile arcs, gone. Their escorts hung stunned in a silence so complete it felt like pressure on the lungs. The Emperor's flagship remained, crippled and alone, trapped in a cage of human trajectories. For the first time since the war began, Varkesh looked less like a ruler than a witness. Admiral Sato spoke one last time. Humanity does not issue final warnings to hear itself speak. The Iron Dominion surrendered 14 seconds later. After that, the war ended quickly, though not gently. Imperial governors who had sneered at Terran law discovered human enforcement teams already in their systems, cutting slave chains, opening detention archives, securing orbital batteries before local commanders understood what had happened. Occupied colonies rebelled the moment Terran relief convoys arrived. Client states abandoned the throne to save themselves. The Dravari Senate denounced Varkesh in absentia before the week was out. A tribunal was convened at Hestia Gate, inside a station still smelling faintly of fire and melted insulation. The captain of the Vengeance of Tharos stood trial beside ministers who had signed the strike order for the St. Geneva. The proceedings were public. Evidence was meticulous. Humanity wanted the record clean. That unnerved the galaxy almost as much as the war. There was no human victory parade across the core worlds, no mass executions, no species purge. Earth demanded reparations, demilitarization, protected status for vulnerable colonies, permanent reform to medical neutrality enforcement, and independent monitoring of major transit lanes. It demanded names, records, and jurisdiction. It demanded the return of the dead where possible, and the accounting of the missing where not. It did not demand worship. It did not need to. Recognition came in quieter ways. The Council Charter was amended so that a final warning, once entered after atrocity-level breach, carried automatic legal weight no member state could dismiss by laughter and delay. Terran navigation standards became mandatory in conflict zones because no one trusted anyone else to keep the roads honest. Human observers were placed on war law review boards from one end of the spiral to the other. Worlds that had once joked about humanity's obsession with procedure now copied its manuals like scripture. And in every military academy worth the name, cadets studied the same lesson written in different words. If humans are patient, you are already in danger. If humans are calm, you are already losing. If humans give you one last chance, take it. Ambassador Ward returned to the council months later for the formal censure of the Dravari Empire. The chamber was full. No one interrupted when she entered. Lord Zarov's seat was empty, its obsidian frame cracked during the evacuation and never repaired. Ward spoke briefly. She said the galaxy had mistaken humanity's desire for peace as an inability to enforce it. She said Earth would continue to uphold the law, continue to trade, continue to negotiate in good faith. Then she looked up at the upper tiers, where the laughter had begun on the day of the warning, and let the silence do its work. By then, everyone knew what had happened to the vanished fleets. Some had been trapped in folded pockets and recovered later as drifting tombs, every weapon dead, every drive sliced from causality by gravitic shear. Some had been boarded in transit and taken apart node by node. Some had been redirected so far off chart their crews were found months later, starving and praying near stars with no names. A few were never found at all. The dark kept its share. The mystery that had thrilled the first news cycles hardened into doctrine, and doctrine into fear. The roads between the stars no longer seemed neutral. They seemed watched. Earth rebuilt Hestia Gate. It rebuilt it larger. At the center of the new station, beneath memorial glass etched with the names of the dead from the St. Geneva and the siege, they placed a simple metal plaque visible from the main arrivals hall. Every diplomat, merchant captain, and fleet officer who passed through could read it in their own language. It carried no threat and no celebration, just a record. Here the line was crossed. Here the warning was given. Here humanity was answered. The galaxy did not mock that plaque. Years later, when new species asked why even the oldest empires now treated Terran notices with almost ritual seriousness, veterans would usually shrug before telling the story. They would speak of the hospital ship, the council's laughter, the fleets that vanished into impossible silence, the emperor who brought 4,000 warships to Sol and left in a prisoner shuttle. They would describe the human habit of saying exactly what they meant, and the even more frightening habit of doing exactly what they said. Eventually, if the listener pressed for the deepest truth of it, the veteran would lower their voice and give the answer history had carved into all of them. Humanity was never terrifying because it loved war. Humanity was terrifying because it had learned how to end one. When the record of the conflict was sealed in the council archives, the final appended note came from an anonymous clerk who had been present on the day Ambassador Ward gave the warning. It was not official language, and no one ever admitted who wrote it, yet somehow it remained in every copied edition thereafter. The galaxy thought humanity had come to beg. It had come to notify. When humanity says this is your final warning, what disappears next is not the threat. It is your future.